Welcome to the next episode of Building the Open Web. Before we start episode today, I have something special to tell you. If you're a Web3 founder, we're actually opening up the second batch of our accelerator, where we can help you with developer incentives, funding, business models, finding adoption. We would love to work with you starting January 2021, and we're still considering some applications until then. Please apply. It's openwebcollective.com. Now, let's get into the episode. Hey, welcome to the new episode of Building the Open Web podcast. Today we have Joyce Yang. Hey, Joyce.
Hey, Sasha. How's it going?
Very good. Let's start with background. So, where did you grow up?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I run Global Coin Research. We provide valuable and relevant information and advise companies on Asia crypto and blockchain. So for a mostly English-speaking audience, since many folks in crypto want to have a worldly perspective towards what's going on in blockchain, but they often don't have the language or the cultural context to understand what's going on in Asia. So we probably will be talking about this later, but Asia obviously is a very important market for many different reasons. So this is something that we at Global Coin Research try to focus intensely on to make sure that everyone gets equal access to information and news on what's happening on the other side of the world, and also often with advising companies when they're trying to go to market there because it's such a big market.
And how did you get into crypto to begin with? When was it?
Yeah, sure. I first learned about crypto. I think it was actually, I heard about Bitcoin, but I really started following crypto during the Ethereum ICO. And I thought it was particularly interesting when I learned that Vitalik raised his first fund and got his first check in Ethereum from a Chinese fund called 分布式. So at that point, I think with the onset of WeChat and many new Chinese technologies kind of venturing into the US as well, that was like back in 2015, I started realizing there was a big gap between understanding Asia and the folks who are in technology and finance here, primarily in the States and the Western hemisphere, who, are seeking out this kind of information, but really don't really know how to access it. So the way I kind of was just doing this for fun was identifying news from various Asia countries around crypto and putting it into a newsletter and sending out to like my friends. And that's how I started Global Point Research, really, with just a newsletter. And, thankfully, somehow, some investors from the space were my early adopters of the newsletter and continued to encourage me to actually continue to do it because they found it so helpful, because they realized that they don't know about what's going on the other side of the world, and it was so important for them. Shout out to, A Capital, Kartik, who was really there, actually one of my very early subscribers, to be there and tell me that, my product has a product market fit. That was very reassuring. So that's how I started Global Coin Research. And then we kind of expanded out there from doing not just like a newsletter, but also information, news, research, as well as advising companies.
And how does your day-to-day look like today?
So my day-to-day, I think probably like many folks in the space, is reading a lot, but I probably read twice as much content just because I'm in the media and content news space, as well as that, I'm covering crypto, for the English-speaking audience, but about the other side of the world. So, in the mornings, I'm checking not only my Telegram, Discord, or Slack, but also my WeChat channels, that are like countless number of WeChat channels, and also Chinese media as well, because the information is very different. And in crypto, as you know, we just have so much information and so much things happening all the time. So I spend, a good number of hours doing that on a daily basis, and then try to kind of distill the important news and the information that we think is useful for our readers at Global Coin Research.
And who are, from your perspective, main constituents for Global Coin Research today? Did it change from when you started?
It definitely expanded from just, a kind of a friend base into investors, executives, and BD folks, as well as media. So as you can imagine, crypto in Asia is a very niche space, and it's very important, but many people, in order to like follow it, you need to have a kind of background on, finance, tech, crypto, and Asia. So it's a very specialized space. And many times I think what executives end up doing is just coming to us and asking, what we think about certain things, because we have, I just spend so much time on this topic. And so I think that's been our special sauce, and that's been, kind of growing and continuing to be very relevant in this day, since we started.
And how do you think about crypto overall being like global space as opposed to, like internet maybe is a little bit more balkanized across different geographies? Like, why is it such a global space? And also, what is the role of Asia in the space?
So I think about, the participants in the cryptocurrency space into like three buckets. We have the miners and stakers, and then they have the traders and investors, and then lastly, developers and the community, right? So I think any way you look at it, by head count or by hash power or staking contribution, Asia plays a huge part, if not more than the Western Hemisphere. This is something that many people don't realize, but when you actually look under the hood, you realize, a lot of the action isn't happening in the US, right? Given either it's legal reasons or it's because of, cost issues, right? Or, the inability to find talent in the US. It's hard. And in Asia, we have a big greenfield space for people to kind of hire and innovate. And that's continued to be the case since the Bitcoin white paper, essentially. We have the largest Bitcoin mining company that sells mining machines, Bitmain, right, based out of China. You have the large exchanges like Binance and FTX, all based out of Hong Kong or kind of Singapore. And of course, BitMEX, which, funny enough, got their letter from CFTC today. So it's just the environment in Asia, whether that's, you could call it, loose regulations or friendly regulations. But definitely there's a lot of enthusiasm, and that's been really pushing the space along. And we have this hub that you see in Asia now that you don't ever see that you're seeing in the US as well, in the Silicon Valley space, where in the past 50 years, we have kind of venture capitalists kind of funding companies in the Bay Area and really kind of snowballing into big companies and conglomerates like Facebook and Google and what have you. But now we see many of those big companies actually in crypto to be started in Asia as a result of the capital and the interest and the talent that's based out of there.
The next question I have, so can you elaborate a little bit more on your focus on Asia and how is it different from the Western market when it comes to crypto?
Yeah, so I think when you look from the outside in, it may appear very similar to people. Many participants from the Asian ecosystem in crypto are either mining or trading or leveraging this alternative financial infrastructure that's been created, right? But the reason they get into crypto in the first place, I think, is different. The incentives are different. And in Asia, I see people getting involved into crypto like their lives depend on it, right? Which is very much true to many countries, especially third world countries like Indonesia, Philippines, or even second or first world countries like Korea and China, because they have different needs for kind of this financial infrastructure, and crypto really provides that need. So, for example, even in third world countries like Indonesia or Philippines, there are such big trading crypto hubs. And that's primarily because there's a lack of sound financial infrastructure and economic mobility in these countries. And if you can imagine that, when you have in Thailand, they have a stock market just like any other country, but at the same time, their volume and the quality of the shares that go on the stock market is, significantly less and comparable to what we have in the NASDAQ or NYSE SE, right? But Binance or Huobi goes to these countries and they introduce their own exchange, and the platform is similar to what they offer to the US, Binance US versus Binance Thailand. So in that case, that really levels the playing field for everyone, and that provides the access that those folks never have gotten before. So that's super important, I think, for folks there. And, for other countries like China, obviously you have, folks who have trouble, often trying to take money out or have difficulties taking money out of the country. And we still see that as one of the kind of large use cases for crypto these days, given that we've seen, for example, Tether, the stablecoin, has risen in market cap significantly more so. And it's still the only stablecoin that's really risen in market cap significantly in the last few years, primarily because of the ease of transferability and access that it provides for folks in Asia. People pay employees in Tether because it's stable, but it's also widely circulated. So, these are, I think, shows you that crypto has always had a different use case and a more relevant and important use case in Asia. that and folks who are interested in building real products for real use cases definitely shouldn't neglect that region, right?
And so on, how do you think about bottoms-up innovation versus top-down innovation, especially in China? Do you see government playing a more active role than it is in the West?
I think, yes, there are, because, if you look at countries like Singapore, they were Singapore Monetary Authority, for example, was one of the very first government regulators to actually release their commentaries and opinions on different types of crypto coins, such as utility coins and security tokens, right? And of course, countries like China has always been, on the watch for cryptocurrency and tokens. And, what they focus on primarily is, making sure that the citizens in China don't get scammed by cryptocurrencies, right? Because many citizens may like to speculate or gamble on cryptocurrencies, not knowing what's actually underlying the tokens, and often there are nothing underlying these tokens, right? So what I often see is that governments' approach to these tokens are quite savvy and transparent. It depends on the jurisdiction, of course, but Hong Kong and Singapore, for example, are very transparent. They're friendly. They allow these exchanges and, companies to exist, and they treat them fairly. And while, in the Western Hemisphere, we often don't see that as much, or at least right now, we only see SEC cracking down more so than providing any other types of communication or thoughts around the space. So it's been very slow moving in the Western Hemisphere. And I think, regardless of whether the governments, may not be supportive, they at least tell you they're not supportive. But often that's not the case in Asia. They, China is very advanced in introducing their central digital currency and trying to digitize the entire cash flow outflow, right? And supply. And they're trying to kind of often approach other neighboring countries in Asia with their technology to offer them the same kind of platform to use for their citizens. So I think that's something that the US probably needs to kind of follow up and chase on.
Okay, and sounds like based on your response, the Asia's dominance is here to stay, right?
Yeah, I think Asia's role, especially China's role in Web3, is going to overtake the US. If you think about it, in the kind of last few years, right, we're already seeing that the largest industries in tech are leading the way, and those are in fintech or consumer tech, and the largest companies coming out of those are now from China, right? So in consumer tech, for example, you have ByteDance and TikTok, right? That's already creating a huge uproar in between the countries. And then Alipay and WeChat, which are owned by Alibaba and Tencent respectively, are digitizing the entire cash payment system in China for 1 billion people at least. So I think just from that kind of pattern, and back 20 years ago, we've seen the kind of the internet boom and kind of the Web2 coming on set. And often you have Chinese companies copying those companies and bringing it back to China because, that was, that was like the trend to do. But now that's not the case anymore, right? It's all about, kind of innovating and catering to users and coming up with new go-to-market strategies. And I've seen a lot of Western folks actually copying China now. So, for example, there's a news today that the CoinList CEO, Andy Bloomberg, will be leaving CoinList to go to Eco, which is a company that's trying to copy WeChat. So we're seeing this phenomenon happening very quickly, where immediately from the shift of like Chinese people trying to copy the US entrepreneurs, now it's the opposite because they're seeing so much impact coming out from these large tech companies in China. So I think that's super interesting. And given how the government in China now is so focused on enabling tech innovations, just looking forward with their central bank digital currency that, not many countries have really spoken out about. It's very clear to me that they'll be very important in Web3, and it's something that US folks probably need to focus more attention on.
And when you think about also DeFi space, how do you think about the trends when it comes to decentralized finance in Asia?
Yeah, I think right now, what we're seeing, just by looking at the top DeFi companies by total value locked for Compound or Synthetics or DYDX or MakerDAO, their second or largest market is actually China, consistently. So we do see a huge demand for DeFi. I think that's something that's often neglected or not known by many people, right? Many folks think that it's just the ecosystem is just in the Western part, but if you actually look in WeChat, there are so many people who are very active about learning about DeFi, talking about DeFi, and really, I think DeFi in some ways is still more relevant in China and the rest of Asia because of this lack of financial access, like the way they have it, in the US. So that still continues to be relevant, and we see new companies now from China who are former long-term members of the DeFi and the Ethereum community who are actually creating really cool startups. Like there's a startup called Dodo that's creating also an exchange, decentralized exchange, and the team came from back in the days of DDEX, right? That's one of the very first early decentralized exchanges, and they came out of China. So I think one cannot kind of neglect or ignore the flexibility and the kind of power of the Chinese community, I think, often, because they really do follow everything that's happening in the space. And if you think about, the current hot trend now, which is, every exchange issuing their own tokens and promoting liquidity mining, that's something that's actually kind of was made popular by this Chinese exchange called Fcoin, that started by the CTO of Huobi back in 2018. Although that exchange did kind of, I think, get hacked or lost a bunch of money for the users, but the ideas actually came from China. And I think now, we have folks who usually in the past would have frowned upon tokens, token issuance, because, people still were very equity driven back in a few years ago. Now everyone's, about that token. And that's been the case and a very practical view from many Chinese communities from the get-go.
And how do you think about go-to-market strategy for projects that are maybe not from Asia, but thinking about this market as one of the important markets for them? How do they go about tackling it?
Yeah. So my advice for companies who are go to market in Asia or just kind of thinking about globally addressing an audience, I think first focus on building. That's the number one and the most important thing always, because when you build, you attract investors and you attract good quality people. And the investor space is quite global, and it's a quite small group of folks whom I would say that, probably 1 out of 3 investors that you talk to know someone from Asia. Whether that's, another Asian investor or someone who, is a participant in the mining or trading space in Asia. So that's helpful for companies to build and attract good, talented, and smart people, whether that's investors or other employees or talent pools. And then secondly, learning is something that I think that I emphasize to entrepreneurs, because and I mean learning is not just learning about the news, learning about what's going on around the crypto space, and knowing, kind of keeping an eye out on Asia. I think that's important, but that's probably not as important as actually learning from the users. So when you're in your Discord or Telegram channel, you should also start a WeChat channel, just so that you have, you could attract and have those folks, the folks from China, for example, to have a place to talk about your project. And you should be in there often trying to understand, or, using WeChat Translate to actually understand what's going on in those channels, because they may be your largest user base and you just not know that. And because of the language barrier, you miss out this entire market opportunity, right? So that's something that I recommend folks doing. And then also, the easy approach to learning, of course, is kind of following certain folks on Twitter, like news aggregators like Wu Blockchain. It's WEU Blockchain. They're a very widely followed Chinese crypto influencer who now has just built their own Twitter channel as well. So that's been very helpful for getting information in China. Global Coin Research, that's a self-plug there. And then those are things that I think many entrepreneurs may not realize is useful, but I think it's super useful because once you have a WeChat channel for your own project, for example, then you could try to engage the interest and hire someone from there, from the channel, right, to be your consultant or to get their views on what's going on in the market, to see, where can you kind of build into that particular market. And of course, that's going to be not just WeChat. It's going to be, Kakao Talk for Korea, or Line for Japan, and WhatsApp for Singapore or whatnot. So those are kind of like some things that I think are easy access and useful advice for folks. And another thing I wanted to mention was this book that I recently read. It's called The Cultural Map by Erin Mayer. It's a book about how to approach different business cultures. And they highlight, for example, that, the Israelis are very direct in terms of, their approach or business conversations, while, Americans often compliment you 3 times before, they get into the bad parts, right? So those are very useful business advice, especially in crypto, because you deal with people in so many different backgrounds. So she just recently also co-authored this book on Netflix with the Netflix CEO, Reed Hastings. And I recommend that book too, because it's very good about kind of operating a company, but that's on the side.
Nice. And how do you approach also building awareness? Is it any different in terms of like press, media, memes, crypto, Twitter? Like how would you approach the awareness building phase for Asia?
I think it's very similar, but the influencer space is very much a significantly larger in Asia than the US. And I say that because there are not many, comparison to the US, there are not as many large funds with large amount of capital putting in, kind of being placed into crypto. But there are a lot of influencers who help bring in new audiences, and they're often very vocal on Weibo or the Chinese social media, and for folks who are not familiar with Chinese media in general, live stream and video, or small short clip videos like TikTok have been widely adopted in China. Right, so influencers go on those platforms to talk about crypto, and that's something that we don't have the kind of the infrastructure, or at least not widespread adoption here in the U.S. So I think that's something that's very useful. And aside from influencers, it will be media, like similarly to the block crypto, we have partnerships with Chain News from China, for example, or folks in Japan, or the CoinDesk Korea or Japan. They have arms there as well that folks could go to for press, but community building usually comes from influencers or someone who's been in the space for a long time. So those are the things I think you should look for.
And how would you also describe the kind of like developer communities in Asia versus like Western markets? In US, for example, there are some people who are tinkering on crypto on like nights and weekends, but like there's still very limited interest in terms of like Google, Facebook engineers in crypto. But there are some hubs like New York and San Francisco, probably big hubs. There are like smaller hubs like Denver and many others. Like how do you think about the hubs in Asia, but also like where developers hang out also?
So many developers I meet in crypto in Asia are very diehard believers in crypto. Like I mentioned before, like the folks from Asia generally have more stake. So they're not just mostly the traders you see in crypto, for example, are just, putting in their some disposable income and putting into crypto and, see where it goes, and kind of speculate a little bit on the side for fun. And like you mentioned, developers who also kind of work nights and weekends, but, there's really no real consequences when it comes to if you don't ship anything. But I think often the developers I've met, for example, the founder of Maskbook, he was a hacktivist. He really believes in kind of the decentralized ethos, and he wants to build something for the next Web3 that's going to be valuable for millions of users, right? So that's not the case to say that there are no founders like that in the US, right? But what I'm saying is that I think developers often are attracted to crypto in Asia for a certain ethos. And, many folks joined Ethereum very early on in China and was a very, adamant and loyal supporter of Ethereum. And they still are now. And that kind of loyalty is very hard to find in the US in certain ways, right? We have a small subset of population who are still like that. But I think I see more of that enthusiasm and the talent pool being pretty consistently active in Asia. So like even as a talent, having that talent pool in Asia, it's significantly cheaper for entrepreneurs, and that's something worth thinking about as well, right? Because there are talented people from all over the world, and just by by population, right, you probably get significantly number more of engineers who may know about how to code smart contracts, and that's something that's worth considering as well, given that we still don't have as many engineers as we need in the space.
Yep, I agree. What do you think are examples of some of the projects that are doing a good job in Asia when it comes to awareness? Maybe like from the outside projects.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Near is doing a great job. Obviously, full disclosure, I'm an investor in Near as well. But I think one of the reasons I invested in Near was that I knew you guys were globally minded in the first place because, Ilya spoke Chinese and he traveled to China, and I see him in conferences in Asia all the time. Everywhere we go, we see Near. And that's a very important sign to me to see that, as a founder who's very engaged with the global community, regardless of, geography, right? So that's something that I think is very worth learning from, because often, travel takes time and founders may not want to make that kind of effort in the beginning when they're building companies because they're like, I want to be heads down, building a product. But I think in crypto, it's an entirely different kind of approach in the sense that you got to go to understand your audience first, and that audience is like widely spread around all over the world, and that's something many founders already kind of don't do, right? And they build something that doesn't really address any problems because how many people are really depending their lives on crypto in the US. So that's I often see communities in Asia from projects like Solana or Polkadot, or of course Ethereum's the largest one, and it continues to be. And in every large engaged crypto country that we see in Asia, Ethereum has still a very large following, right? So I think they're a great kind of gateway drug for folks to understand and learn about first, and then really kind of bring on the new platforms or protocols that are building in this space.
And would you say that some cities are bigger hubs for crypto in Asia, or it's pretty widespread?
Yeah, I think for institutional trading, I would split it into many different categories of where the kind of the hubs are. But institutional trading we would see a lot of institutional traders and investors in Hong Kong and Singapore. We see a lot of retail traders in Vietnam, actually, and China and Indonesia. And then you could split it into more like specific subsets of, where the NFTs enthusiasts coming from. And that's, many times Korea or Japan, because gaming is very large. It's a very large industry there. And so it really depends on what the founders or the company is focusing on to know, what markets they should go to. But often I just direct them to Singapore and Hong Kong because they're English-speaking cities where it's a lot easier to engage with crypto folks there, and they're just more friendly in terms of legal jurisdiction for crypto.
Got it. And any particular conferences you can mention? Like I was wondering, like if Asia is like also like reopened fully after COVID, are there conferences starting to happen?
So in China, conferences have started to happen. I don't think so for other countries yet. I had a plan to go to Japan at the end of the year, and I don't think that's going to happen. So, but in China, they're already opening up the country for visitors with kind of a permanent pass, permanent residency. So before, China was only allowing citizens to return back to the country during COVID, and now they're opening up slightly to allow permanent citizens to also return to China. So conferences are actually happening there already. And, there was a mining conference that happened in Sichuan, which was kind of the mining hub in China. And I think there are several more coming on, happening this soon. I guess, but the problem is that, it's hard to really have a global conference or have a crypto conference without the global audience as well. So, often I think it's more interesting when you have, the Western folks intermingle with the Eastern folks and then kind of having those dialogues and discussions and kind of reconciling their differences or understanding better of each other. So we're not seeing that right now, unfortunately. So that's probably only going to happen until next year, mid-year, until we have a vaccine, I guess.
Cool, this makes sense. And sounds like you're also doing some advisory work with founders. What kind of help do you provide?
So I've been spending more time on the investing side nowadays on Global Coin Ventures. And Global Coin Ventures is a fund that we started about 6 months ago. And the capital is primarily coming from family and friends. And we're writing angel checks to companies. And primarily, I think our value add is really helping founders understand what's going on the other side of the globe, kind of connecting them and liaison them into that ecosystem, whether that's investors, participants, traders, media, what have you, right? So I think, and on the opposite side, we try to uplift those founders who I mentioned to you, who I find a lot of potential in Asian founders in this Web3 world to kind of help them get recognized in the Western side, because I think one of the very memorable things I remember reading about TikTok, for example, for investing was that when the Sequoia partner from China first came across TikTok, they didn't invest in TikTok because they realized they thought that the company didn't have a counterpart that was successful in the US. So if you think about it that way, that has shifted, that kind of mindset has shifted on its head significantly, right? So what we try to do is make sure that a lot of entrepreneurs from the Asia side gets a lot of opportunities, or equal, if not more opportunities, because that's where a lot of potential is now.
Cool. And where do people find more about you, Global Coin Research, or the venture side of the business?
So they could find us at, follow me at Joyce in NYC on Twitter. And also we have Global Coin Ventures is globalcoin.ventures, but Global Coin Research is globalcoinresearch.com. And yeah, feel free to tweet me. I am and my DMs are open at all times.
Cool. Thank you for joining today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for listening to today's episode. We are actually excited to announce that you can apply to the second batch of our accelerator at openwebcollective.com. We are reviewing applications on a rolling basis to select 15 teams to join us January 21. Please consider applying there. It's openwebcollective.com. Thank you.